I'd like to keep my identity and personal information, including my location, private, but for the purposes of what I'm sharing, you can refer to me as Rick. In February of 2002, I celebrated 31 years in law enforcement. A monumental occasion like that can only be followed up with a party of your closest friends, coworkers, and family. Many remarked that I didn't look old enough to have so many years with the police force. Normally, I would agree, but lately, I felt myself slowing down, and the timing couldn't have been better because I was ready to retire. I found it harder to keep up with the younger guys. My feet were worn out, and these young guys were intense and in phenomenal shape, working out with weights. You've heard the saying, with age comes wisdom, but I don't remember the part that includes arthritis. I couldn't handle the extremely long days anymore, sitting or walking. My beat was in an urban area of Pennsylvania. That's all I'll say. I never wanted to sit behind a desk, even though it was offered, but it was my time to go, and I happily embraced it. I put my wife through decades of worrying, and she was grateful that we could now spend time doing some traveling and visiting family. It's true what they say about the high divorce rate among police officers. Not everyone is cut out for it, especially the spouses. It was touch and go a few times. We visited family across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland. It was one of our trips crisscrossing the state that we eventually ended up in Maryland and discovered a beautiful piece of property with rolling hills and a small orchard in Washington County. It appeared that the property hadn't been maintained. I'm not sure how long it was vacant, but the farmhouse was quite nice. The orchard, however, would take work and with some outside help. Retirement wasn't setting in just yet. I still wanted to work in some capacity. The house was a conglomeration of a simple 2-story home that had been added onto over the years. Definitely not the prettiest house, but still very functional. Lots of space for the extended family when visiting. We went to work on some remodeling. The house seemed dark and, considering its age, badly needed a kitchen update and more light. My thought was to install a large bay window which would catch the rising sun and overlook the orchard, which happened to be quite close to the house. It was almost September, and with all of the home remodeling construction, our timing was off and there wouldn't be a chance to harvest the apples. I was completely unprepared for the apple season. I had no tools except for what was left in an old barn converted to a shop. Halloween was approaching and construction finally wrapped up. Once the remodel was done, we began noticing odd things. Strange things like shadows that would dart back and forth by our brand new bay window. One of the contractors that had returned to clean up asked me if I'd seen a tool chest. It was hard to miss since it had to be 3 feet wide and bright blue, and with all the tools in various drawers, it had to weigh 100 pounds, if not more. I told him I hadn't seen it, but I'd be on the lookout for it. I started to think we had thieves. The darting shadows could very well have been someone trying to steal items in and around the house. Being a newly retired policeman, I was ready to patrol the property. As I thought back to the times I saw the shadows, it was always late in the evening when we were watching TV. I stayed up late the first night walking around the house, only flashing my light when necessary. I was born and raised in the city, and I was not used to the silence and deep darkness out here in the country. On occasion, as I patrolled the grounds, I could hear what sounded like walking in the distance, leaves crunching. It seemed to be in the orchard. As soon as I walked in that direction, it would stop. My flashlight revealed nothing. I walked down a few rows, flashing my light, but still unable to see anything or hear any movement. I woke up the next morning, crashed out on the couch in our family room. I must have fallen asleep watching our bay window. It faced the orchard. My wife was already up and remarked how dirty the brand new window was as she pointed at large smudges. "Did you mess up my windows with your dirty hands?" she asked. As I stared at the smudges, I held my hand up to them only to realize that the smudge on the other side of the glass was a hand, a very large hand, maybe twice the length of my fingers and a wider palm, too. The handprint was about halfway up the bay window. I played off the dirty windows and went to grab a rag and a cleaner. I guess it never occurred to me that the bay window looked out across parts of the orchard. We had a slight slope down to the orchard, giving a slight elevation and a grand view. I'd say the bottom of the window was about 10 feet. Once I got a ladder out and calculated the height of the arm to the window, there had to be a 7.5 to 8 foot tall person walking around here with huge hands. That's damn near impossible. I was considering calling the local police department, but I had to have more evidence of someone trespassing on my property. I did my best to keep this to myself for now. Since I dropped the ball on getting the orchard going, I had purchased a cart to walk through the rows and pick up all the rotten apples that had fallen. I would expect this would take quite a few hours and a few pills of Aleve with my newfound arthritis. As I walked the rows, I was surprised at how there were very few apples on the trees, and even more so the lack of apples on the ground. The ones I did find on the ground were all partially eaten by something. As I picked them up and inspected them, I could see bite marks. Some of the bite marks were small, maybe a small rodent or birds, and yet some were quite large. If I were to guess, and I was guessing, it looked like something ate the good side of the apple. Maybe a bear? But wouldn't a bear just eat the whole apple? I thought that would make sense. It doesn't take an expert to figure that out. I also saw large depressions in the ground, footprints. I suspected it had to be a big bear. But the fact that the trees seemed to have very little fruit hanging on them just stumped me. To my knowledge, and from what I've learned, an apple tree typically produces several hundred apples over its season. But there was almost nothing here. We're talking 40 pounds a tree. It had to be thieves. This wasn't possible. It was just after Halloween. Over the next several days, I continued to patrol the area at night. All I was doing was patrolling, clumsy, making noise and shining lights. I needed to be stealthy. Whatever was out there wasn't threatened by me. The following night, I told my wife what I thought was going on. She claimed I was paranoid and told me to be careful. She reminded me of my limitations. Of course, she was right. But I wasn't going to let her know she was right. I sat up in the second-story bedroom with the window cracked. It overlooked the orchard and was directly above my family room. I've done stakeouts. I've learned to be patient, and after a while, I heard walking. Not your normal walking. Heavy walking. It almost sounded like a horse on 2 legs. I have no other way to describe it. Just a heavy thumping that sounded to me like a horse. I have no other way to describe it. Well, I do have another, but it's so fantastic that I almost can't think it. It sounds like a giant walking along the orchard. I see the shadow. It appears to be tall and broad, moving slowly. Not like the darting shadows I saw from the downstairs window when we first moved in. I don't know what possessed me to walk outside with my service revolver, but once I let my eyes adjust to the darkness, I walked quietly down the row towards the shadow. It barely moved since I first saw it, and it seemed oblivious to me as it ate apples off the ground. The closer I walked toward it, the more I thought the shadow resembled a gorilla. Heavy in stature in the front and tapered off to the back. I was probably 50 feet away. As I pointed my revolver towards the creature, A million thoughts came to mind. What am I looking at? Is it a gorilla? Can a .38 do enough damage? What if I miss? Are there more? And as if to answer that question, something was climbing and bouncing on an apple tree in the adjacent row to my right. I couldn't really make it out, but somehow I knew they were together. It made a small, low-pitched chattering noise, and then the big gorilla-shaped shadow turned and looked straight towards my direction. It sees me. The chattering thing in the tree seemed to be jumping up and down. Apples were falling. I'm terrified. I take a few steps backward towards the house. They know my intentions. I decide to lower my gun. The one to my right jumps from the tree and darts over to within feet of me. It's not human. It too looks like a gorilla, broad in the shoulders and a conical-shaped head, but smaller than the other. Everything about these creatures is black. Their face, their eyes, their bodies. It was big, bigger and wider than me. Probably had a foot on me, maybe 7 feet tall. I try like hell to remain calm. I'm fighting back tears and waves of panic. I continue to retreat. I kept thinking the smaller one would run up and cut me off, because its speed was incredible. I don't remember what happened with the bigger one. I completely forgot about it since I was entirely focused on getting away from the one in front of me. As I entered the house, I just sank to the ground. After a while, I went around to all the doors and made sure they were locked. I don't know why I thought that would keep them out. I mean, my gun would probably just piss them off. Thinking back after that encounter, it never acted aggressive towards me. I never saw teeth or any kind of aggressive posture. This clearly is not something I've ever encountered in my career and would definitely rank it up there in the top 2. During a drug raid, I had a gun dry fire at point-blank range in my face. That was traumatic, to put it lightly. The Lord must be watching over me. That was the closest I've ever got to these things. Yes, I know they're Bigfoot. I still live in the farmhouse, and they still come to eat my apples in the fall. On occasion, I still catch a glimpse of them here and there, darting around in the evenings. Their speed is uncanny. I believe there's 3 now. I will tell you, I've never seen one in the daytime, but then again, I don't go looking for them. I never did make a business out of the orchard. I don't want anyone to hurt these creatures. Seems like they're being squeezed out of whatever habitat they have. The urban sprawl continues to creep outward. I have a neighbor that comes over and helps me in the orchard. We go in together, and he helps me get my share, and they get the rest. It's too bad I didn't reach out to him when this first happened. He says they've been migrating through here for as long as he can remember, and he's no spring chicken either. I've got an update for you, Mike. The story doesn't stop there. After all these years, they keep coming around. This was much more recent. I was running a little late for a doctor's appointment in town, only to find that my car's battery was dead, which meant I had to take my pickup that was parked on the other side of the house. I have to say, I was lost in thought and distracted. I jumped in the truck as fast as someone my age can jump in a truck. I started the engine and shifted to drive, pulling quickly around in a circle towards the exit of my driveway. Again, totally distracted, until I heard a sliding sound and then felt a heavy thud slam stopping at the tailgate. Startled, I slammed on the brakes, stopping, in time to see something heavy, hairy, and black jump out of the bed of my truck and take off behind the barn. It appeared to be hunched over to the point that it seemed like it was using its arms and legs in tandem to almost gallop away. I don't know why, but in my head, I kept thinking of a horse. Maybe because it was just so big combined with its speed, except that I couldn't really see its head. There didn't appear to be any damage to the truck, but there were at least a dozen mostly eaten apples, some flattened and crushed all over the inside of the bed of my truck. Once my heart started beating again, I drove away slowly to see if I could catch a glimpse. The only thing I saw were some trees and bushes swaying in the distance. We're getting older, and my kids stop by occasionally. They know about what we've seen, and they're on the fence. Can't blame them. However, if my wife was home, I wouldn't have gone to my doctor's appointment. Sometimes I think they get comfortable and maybe a little too close for comfort. Did I mention they're scary? Thanks very much for listening, and I hope everyone is staying safe. If you've got a little extra time on your hands like the rest of us, check out Tom Lyon's latest audiobook, Bigfoot Frightening Encounters, narrated by me. More to come on future audiobooks. I'll include a link in the show notes for you. Also, stay tuned for Bigfoot's Wilderness Podcast Episode 3, where I wrap up my conversation with Anthony. That will drop later this week. Thanks, and please take care.